But those legs of Amelia's, he couldn't say no to that. Early Saturday morning, Michael texted Ivy, July, I'll pick up Amelia at the airport in the morning, drop her off at home. Where do you want to go in the afternoon? Michael's car is reserved for Ivy, and he borrowed it from a coworker to pick up Amelia. Ivy was in a bit of a down mood, not because of Michael picking up Amelia. On the contrary, she was happy that Michael picked up Amelia and was able to be very open with her about his whereabouts. Just the thought of seeing Amelia made Ivy uncomfortable. She messaged Michael back. She's not going. My mom told me to stay home and wait for Amelia. Nothing more, a very unusual phrase, and Michael immediately grasped Ivy's mood of after the two of them got back together. Michael hadn't deliberately asked Ivy about that incident. He knew that it was a scar on her heart that though Michael couldn't know what the truth was, he chose to believe, to trust in Ivy's goodness, in the girl who had twice been on the brink of life and death and still protected the child in her arms. That she would never be the one to push Amelia down the stairs. Amelia is now a well-known author with her own publishing company, an agent, and even fans to pick her up. Amelia was considered a traditional beauty, with a pointed melon face, fair skin, eyebrows like distant mountains, and eyes like a pair of phoenix eyes, like an ancient beauty of a great generation. The only downside is that she can't stand up, and she was sitting in a wheelchair, smiling affably at the dozen or so fans who had met her at the airport. Fans pulled out her books and asked her to sign them, and she signed them one by one, before letting her assistant and agent push her way to the parking lot to find Michael. It would have been easier to park the car on Amelia's side of the arrival gate at the airport. But Michael preferred not to make it that far. Amelia, being a sensitive-minded person, should be able to understand what he meant by that gesture. Nonetheless, Amelia was very happy to see Michael, though this kind of happiness is different than when she was just facing her fans. It's the kind of smile that really comes from the inside out from her heart, and she calls, Brother Michael. Michael didn't have much of an expression. Just a that after a group of people had been busy back and forth for half a day, Amelia finally got into the car, and the agents and assistants went back to their own. In fact, like Amelia, such a well-known writer, even if no one to pick up the company will certainly be arranged properly, but she did not want to, so that the agent and assistant, very helpless, peeled away. Michael drove intently while Amelia kept talking to him, rummaging in her carry-on bag for those knickknacks she'd brought back from Nepal, the ruby, sapphire, wild kiwi. Amelia talked for most of the day. And Michael wasn't really interested, and didn't really chime in. She was sour inside. But it had been that way since she was a child, and she knew Michael's temperament, and a response like this with little response was considered good enough to prove that he was okay with her. The Amelia did not give up and took out another thing, and said seriously to Michael, This is a Nepalese scripture roller. The high priests over there have recited the scripture. It can make people peaceful, Brother Michael. I am worried every time you go out on a mission. This is for you. I hope that if you take it with you, you can be blessed by Buddha, and be peaceful all the time. She said it so truly, she could have brought herself to tears. However, Michael's words were like a pot of cold water coming down on his head. Keep it to yourself. I don't believe in it. He really doesn't believe in it, and in their industry, they're not allowed to believe in it. Amelia snapped, withdrawing her hand. Not dying. Let's have dinner at my house tonight. My mom and dad would be so happy to see you, and if the two of us could be together. The Amelia was still lost in her own beauty sleep. She'd been paranoid that as long as her leg was like that because of Ivy, a responsible man like Michael would be responsible for her for the rest of his life. Michael interrupted Amelia without mercy. Amelia, we are not going to be together. The Amelia became excited and cried out hoarsely, You still have her in your heart, you haven't forgotten her. The Amelia did not realize that the she of whom she spoke, Ivy, was at home at the moment, waiting for her return, as her mother had ordered her to do. Michael was silent. What do you mean you haven't forgotten? What do you mean you still have her in your heart? It's always been there. It's never been forgotten. It's just that he couldn't say this to Amelia, saying it would only add to the conflict between the two sisters. Michael hit the steering wheel right and said seriously to Amelia, Amelia, since I was a little girl I've treated you as my sister. Not being with you, not being able to marry you has nothing to do with Ivy, and even if there was no such person as Ivy in the world, it wouldn't be you. The Amelia's tears poured down, and she kept murmuring, No, you're lying to me, you must be lying to me. The Michael had obviously been so good to her, since she was a little girl, but how could it end up like this? That the car stopped in front of Ivy's house. Michael rang the doorbell and went to the trunk to get Amelia's folding wheelchair and opened it up, carrying the person to the wheelchair. Seeing the babysitter come out, that's when he said to Amelia, "I have something to do, so I'm going to go ahead." And Amelia froze as she watched Michael walk off in a cloud of dust, and she suddenly hated, very much hated Michael and hated Ivy. Why didn't she just stop being cruel, if she even jumped in the first place? Wouldn't these two be a little more upset now, if she died, and would live with the guilt for the rest of their lives? Amelia began to regret wildly, to regret that, as it was, what she wanted was not to be had, and that she herself was an invalid, and that life was worse than death, and that Amelia wiped away her tears and put on a different face before returning home. She couldn't do that in front of her parents. Rose wouldn't like her. Amelia was wheeled in by the babysitter. Her voice was there before she arrived. "Mom and Dad, I'm home." John and Rose were both very happy that Amelia was in a better mood when she heard a response coming from the living room. She entered the living room, but her whole face clouded over when she saw another man sitting on the sofa, and soon, as if cowering in fear, she turned her wheelchair and flung herself over to Rose's side of the room. "Mom, what's her sister doing back here?" Rose patted Amelia's back in a soothing gesture. "Your sister can't be out here all the time, it's her home." Ivy took it all in and felt very sad. Amelia was acting like she'd really hurt her, but she hadn't done anything, obviously. Amelia changed the subject and said happily to Rose, "Mom, brother Michael drove me home today," she finished, even inclining her head to give Ivy a provocative look when her parents weren't looking. Ivy didn't give a damn. Michael had checked in about picking up Amelia. Rose's complexion but changed. "The family is not no car, nor no driver," I said. "Let someone go over to pick you up." "You yourself, Bias, said that the agency will send you." "How is it, Michael?" Amelia pouted. "Isn't it okay that brother Michael cares about me?" She tried her best to put in a good word for Michael in front of Rose. Rose, unmoved, said squarely to her two daughters, "Michael the boy is not a good match for either of you. From now on you keep some distance from him, and don't hurt your sisterly feelings because of him any more than you already have." 3 years ago, although their Ivy family is tight-lipped, but more or less someone knows about it, there are no airtight walls in this world. The two daughters of the Ivy family, who fought over a man, and one who broke her leg and was left disabled. Rose really didn't want this to happen again, and was heartbroken for her daughter that she doesn't want any of her daughters involved with Michael anymore. Amelia has a house out there. In fact, she's made a lot of royalties over the years and has a sizable savings, but she's just willing to live with Rose, and her work would not have had to pick any time or place. She wrote when she was happy and not when she wasn't, and she could get it done anywhere. So every time she came back she basically stayed at the compound, but Ivy couldn't take it. And she was checking the time on her cell phone almost all the time. She wanted to leave, but Rose hadn't given the word, and counting the time, Amelia had only been back for a few hours, and it wouldn't be good to leave. Amelia was still undeterred. It couldn't be Ivy, it couldn't be herself. Could it be Grace? She's secretly messaging Michael, isn't that Grace? Michael didn't reply to her. And she continued, "Why Grace, Michael, you're not being fair to me at all. Ivy or Grace, I knew you before any of them, but why is it never me? And why is it never me? And why is it never me?" The message she sent, stone cold, received no reply. Amelia was especially good at pouting and acting pathetic in front of Rose, and Ivy watched her act it out for hours and hours. Rose is also very partial to Amelia. Amelia says the right thing and gives her whatever she wants. Ivy can't stand to see it. During that time, Michael messaged her, "At home, Ivy back, After thinking about it, she returned, and after dinner, left. It was hard to wait until dark, and after an unpalatable dinner at the same table as Amelia, Ivy was finally able to say goodbye to her parents and head back to her apartment. As she left, she received, once again, a provocative look from Amelia. Ivy suddenly felt that she didn't feel like a member of the family, that she was like an extra piece of baggage that had somehow barged into the family. Ivy didn't drive over in Michael's car, and will walk out of the compound and stand under the row of sycamore trees. At night, a pleasant breeze ruffled the leaves of a tree and soothed her a little, but she was always sad in her heart. In that home, there was her father, her mother, her sister. The father was gentle and even-handed with both his daughters, but the mother was horribly paranoid, favoring Amelia as if she, the daughter, had picked her up, and her sister, with whom she had become almost an enemy. The Ivy was out of her mind for a while before she took out her phone and opened the app to prepare for a taxi. There's a car honking up ahead. Ivy's not responding. The car honked twice again, Ivy thought. She did not block the road. He blindly honked what, even if it is to carry people. Such a black car she did not dare to sit. Ivy, 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 Ivy and Ivy. Just as I was thinking about it, the driver's door of that car had opened, and out stepped a man. That the visitor was long and handsome, and who should it be but Michael? Ivy suspected she was seeing things. How could it be Michael? But look again, it's obvious that it is. She knew that Michael had brought Amelia back today, but he hadn't come into their house. She hadn't even seen him. She'd thought he'd left a long time ago, and she didn't think much of it when she messaged him just now, not realizing that he'd been waiting here all along. Xiaoxuan brother, Ivy's voice could not help but bring some choking in her voice, her eyes glistening with tears. To have him, on a night like this. Ivy felt like Michael was in the middle of a rambling black night, when a light suddenly came on, guiding her forward. That light is light. It's warmth. Michael didn't say anything, just reached for Ivy's hand, which was cold to the touch, and he hastily reached out with his other hand, taking both of hers between his own broad palms, warming her while he led her toward the car. This girl has only been in the house for so little time, less than a day, and she's already like this. She must have suffered a great deal. Michael knew Amelia's temperament all too well. Amelia grew up to be bossy, and when the kids in the compound played together, Amelia was the one who always made small talk among the girls. It was young, and though he could read it, Michael merely thought Amelia was just being clever. But as she grew older, Amelia brought as much of those little witticisms to life as she could, and even used them against her own sister. The Ivy leaned against Michael, tears rolling down her face like pearls, big ones that she couldn't stop. Michael went to rub it with his thumb, but fearing that his hand would be too rough and hurt her, he had to ease the force of his hand to a lighter end. Lighter. I really didn't push Amelia 3 years ago. Ivy's life was plunged into a nightmare that she couldn't get out of 3 years ago. 3 years ago, that birthday party of hers. She was 22 years old, fresh out of college, new to the ministry, and her childhood boyfriend, Michael. She thought she was happy with her life as it was. The kids in the compound who grew up with Ivy sang her a birthday song and wished her a happy birthday. She and Michael sneak out and kiss in the corner of Ivy's house. Their kisses were lingering and intense, and suddenly there was a rattling sound. And Ivy looked up to see that it was her sister, Amelia. Amelia's eyes reddened, but no tears were shed. Neither Ivy nor Michael had any idea how long Amelia had been standing here for. The Ivy knows that Amelia likes Michael. Michael is also aware of, but the feelings of the matter which cannot be changed because of know or do not know. Love a person is love, do not love a person is not love. Amelia calmed down, as if with great determination. She said calmly to Ivy, Ivy, there's something I want to talk to you about. Come here for a minute. And Ivy had always known that this sister was unkind to her, and was even more distant because of Michael, and now it was strange that her sister suddenly wanted to whisper to her, but at that time she was too young to be that wary. And followed Amelia right up to the balcony on the second floor. To this day, Ivy vividly remembers what Amelia said to her that day. Amelia said to her, Ivy, I hate you, and it's all because you came and took away all the love that should have been mine. It's all because of you, brother Michael, Andrew, David, Olivia, Benjamin, all of them, with their eyes on you. It's all because of you that I'm not with Michael. But it's obvious that it's the two of us who are childhood sweethearts. Ivy, what I can't have, you can't have. Amelia's words were so vicious. Hearing Ivy's heart shook, she looked at Amelia with trembling eyes, and asked, what do you want to do? Amelia let out an indulgent laugh. What do you think I want to do? Ivy shook her head. Amelia was almost instantly enraged by Ivy's stupid gesture. She hated Ivy's gesture, her look. Ivy had deceived everyone, her brother Michael, by looking so harmless. Amelia drew up her pitch. July, tell me, if I jumped from here and said you did it, would they forgive you? Would brother Michael forgive you? Would he let a woman as vicious as you spend her life with him? Tell me, if I died. Before she could finish her words, she was interrupted sharply by Ivy. Amelia, you wouldn't dare. To Amelia sneered, who says I wouldn't dare? Amelia was so light that she flipped over the railing on the balcony like that, and jumped, so fast that Ivy couldn't react in time, and a loud thud spread through the garden of Ivy's house, and Ivy shrieked and turned to run downstairs. However, it was too late. Amelia was taken to the hospital for resuscitation and the air pressure in the house was unbelievably low. Amelia hasn't woken up yet. And the truth of what happened can't even be revealed. Even Michael has asked Ivy if she pushed Amelia off the building. Desperation filled her heart, and it never occurred to her that Michael might not believe her. Then Amelia woke up, but her leg was ruined, and she hugged Rose and cried, saying that Ivy had pushed her off. The two sisters were already estranged, and then, because they both liked Michael, they became even more estranged. Rose favored her eldest daughter again, and she believed whatever her eldest daughter said, and Ivy could say nothing. Ivy came home that day and heard Michael's voice coming from her father's study. Michael says, "Aunt Rose, if it's true that July did it, I'll answer to Amelia to the end that he should really think that such a vile thing as this could be done by her, that he should be responsible for Amelia." How would he be responsible for Amelia, leaving her behind to marry Amelia? Ivy's heart was dead. Her next of kin didn't believe her, and the love of her life didn't believe her. She felt like a street rat. Everyone was screaming at her. At that time, the ministry mobilized people to go to the most dangerous war-torn Afghanistan. She handed in an application and sent herself to that place. Ivy was afraid of her unscrupulous sister, afraid of her biased mother, afraid of Michael, who didn't trust her. She had no choice but to go far away. Everything would pass, Ivy thought, and on the other side of the world she could always forget about Michael and start a new life. The 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years. There'll come a time. Michael felt nothing but heartache as Ivy reopened this dusty, unrevealable scar. His heart was so guilty that it cut like a knife, like it was going to torture him to death, alive. When that incident first happened 3 years ago, he didn't have time to think much about it because of the urgency of the situation, and asked Ivy if it was her that pushed Amelia down the stairs. But afterward, when his sanity returned and he quieted down to analyze it, there was no way it could have been Ivy. His July, though stubborn, was the mild kind of stubborn, and kind, and in this relationship she already had him. So why bother with Amelia? And it's Amelia, on the other hand, who has way more motivation than Ivy. But at the time, everyone thought that Amelia, a soft girl, wouldn't intentionally cripple herself, and the only person on the scene besides Amelia was Ivy. Michael wanted to go to Ivy, wanted to apologize to her, wanted to tell her not to be afraid, that he'd always be firmly on her side. But he got a temporary assignment and had to go for many days at a time. When he came back from the mission, the first thing he received was the news from his good buddy David that Ivy's flight was leaving, that she had applied for a posting far away in Afghanistan for an unknown number of years. He hurriedly reported to the chief, and drove tirelessly on to the airfield. The traffic in Washington was so bad that he almost had to shed a tear, as a big man. By the time Michael got to the airport, 5 minutes past the time of takeoff, he saw an airplane skidding out on the runway, cutting across the sky, and wondered if there was an Ivy in there. It was those 5 minutes that separated him from her for 3 years. At that point, he was all cut up. He really hated Ivy. Anything bigger than that was no big deal if they faced it together. Even if Ivy had done it, he still wouldn't have given up on her. Even if she'd changed and become vicious, she'd still be the same woman he'd loved. And he's willing to stay with Ivy and take care of Amelia in her life. But Michael was convinced that Ivy hadn't done it, and he would take her far away from the wicked Amelia, and never speak to Amelia again. But Ivy wouldn't even give him a chance like that. She left. When he met Ivy again, Michael was angry, but he reflected on himself. If he had trusted her enough back then, had been calm enough to stand firmly on her side from the moment it happened, she might not have left. He was at fault for Ivy's departure 3 years ago. Only he still hates this girl ostrich character, more or less to give her some bitter taste, so only to this girl 3 times to tease ignore. The girl in front of him couldn't stop crying. Michael kissed her tearful eyes. Ivy's eyelids drooped and her lashes brushed against his lips. There was no desire in his kisses, only heartache, boundless heartache. That July, I don't want to. We're going home. Ivy nodded softly. He was going to take her home. They would have a home. She wouldn't have to go to the Ivy house that staged the mother-daughter love affair, and she wouldn't have to suffer all the aggravation of the lonely. And deep in the night, Michael drove the car and Ivy fell asleep in the passenger seat, tired of crying. I don't know how long I drove, but I finally arrived in the parking lot of Michael's apartment. Ivy was still asleep, only not so soundly. and in her dreams with a sobbing voice and a frown on her face that Michael got out of the car, gently closed the door, went around to Ivy's side of the car, opened the door, unbuckled her seatbelt and carried her out of the car in a cross-armed position. While waiting for the elevator, she woke up, looked at him with sleepy eyes and winced. "Where is this?" The Michael spat out 2 words. "My house." Michael's apartment. Ivy had been here, just blinded by crying and blinded by sleep, and hadn't slowed down for a while. In this case, she didn't think much of it. All Ivy felt was that the man holding her, with his strong, robust arms and warm body, had been her greatest support. The Michael carried Ivy through the door, set the person down on the couch, and turned to get a pad to wipe her face with. She cried so hard that her face was red with tears, her eyelids were swollen, and the whites of her eyes turned red, just like an aggrieved bunny. He rubbed her can not help but smile. That smile with a few points of pity. "July, in the future, those agreed, we are not going to suffer. Let's get married. They'll have their own families, they'll have their own children, they'll have their own lives, and they won't have to worry about things that don't matter." Michael solemnly asked Ivy to marry him, because it was so rushed, with no flowers, no diamond ring, but with a heart of gold. He knew he'd said that too hastily, but he couldn't bear to see Ivy suffer. Ivy had indeed cried long and hard. Her voice was muffled, and her voice was soft, so soft that Michael thought his ears were out of joint. Okay, from now on, all the mountains and seas between you and me will be leveled, all the difficult paths between you and me will be turned into bright avenues, and all the thousands of miles of ice between you and me will be turned into warm flowers in spring." Michael stood up ecstatically, about to call Lucas. Instead, Ivy pounced on him and kissed him hard on the lips as soon as she. "How fortunate she has been in her life, that everything she has wished for has been asked for." Everything seemed to fall into disarray, and what followed seemed to be described only in terms of the unspeakable. Ivy woke up at the crack of dawn, and she was alone in her bed. Ivy was about to get up when the bedroom door was pushed open and Michael entered. Carrying a bag of Michael put the stuff on the nightstand and asked her if she was feeling sick. Ivy hurriedly shrank back under the covers, blushing so red she was dripping blood, biting her lip and shaking her head. Michael smiled and gave Ivy a kiss on the lips, pointing to something on the nightstand. "New clothes. Try to see if they fit." Michael laughed flirtatiously, meaningfully, "and Ivy's kicking people out." "I'm getting changed." Michael, not wanting to piss her off, lifted his feet and headed out the door, saying as he did so, "Get changed and come out to eat. Got you your favorite dunking buns." Ivy was so hungry that she changed and came out and sat down at the table to feast on her food. Michael bought these soup dumplings which are really good. The skin is thin enough, the filling is big enough, the soup is soupy enough, and the flavor is delicious. She ate 7 or 8 in a row in one breath, supporting her little tummy to a round circle. Ivy sat on the couch with her hands on her stomach, infinitely contented, and after sitting for a while, her hand suddenly lurched and she broke out into a cold sweat. They hadn't taken any measures last night. Could there already be a little baby? Ivy's face paled with fright, and Michael, fearing that she was unwell somewhere, asked her, hurriedly, what was the matter with Ivy cried out, "Will you get pregnant?" Not having thought so much about it last night in the heat of passion, Michael mused, and feeling sorry for her, Ivy saw that Michael didn't say anything and assumed that he didn't want a baby. And he said he'd marry her. Humph, man's mouth. Lying ghost. She got in a little mood and kicked him, not so gently, in the calf of his. Michael, all unguarded, fell onto the couch and he let out a soft chuckle. "What do you think? If you have a baby, do you want it or don't you want it? Do you want to have it?" Ivy sniffed and thought seriously about how it would be nice to have a child that looked like Michael and had a temper like Michael. A big one and a small one. Michael. That's pretty good. She thought about it for half a day, and finally answered in the affirmative, thinking that Michael's mouth quirked. "I'd love to. I'm going to get the marriage report. When are we going to meet your parents? I'll talk to Aunt Rose." And Michael knew the concern in Ivy's mind, and he didn't want to put Ivy through her mother again, so only he, as a man, had to bear the burden of. Ivy thought about it for a moment, and was in a bit of a dilemma, thinking about her mother's heated words when she talked about Michael. Xiaoxuan, she called halfway through her title, suddenly felt that it seemed a bit awkward to use that title again given their current relationship, so she changed her tone. "Michael, just give me a little more time, I'll talk to my mom about." Michael doesn't push her, and softly says, "Good." Michael was a man of action, And just after he finished, he called Lucas, the political commissar, about the marriage report, and asked Lucas to send him the electronic version to fill out first. Lucas is really helpless in his mind. This kid is thinking of one thing or the other. In a few days, their military district and other military districts have a particularly large joint exercise. In the period before the exercise, they will be a little easier, so this weekend Lucas is also on vacation. He wanted to be at home to water the flowers and planting grass, and then spend time with his wife and children, but the result is that Michael, this kid to bother, humph, you get married to be important, and I have a harmonious family relationship does not matter? It's important for you to get married, but it's not important for me to have a harmonious family relationship. Lucas didn't give Michael the time of day. It's the weekend, you'll talk about it when you get to work on Tuesday, snapped, and hung up the phone dryly. Ivy could hear Lucas's displeasure on this side of the phone and couldn't help but laugh. In fact, there was no hurry at this moment. Besides, now she felt the most difficult, or Rose's side, that she really didn't know how to talk to her mother, but even so, she was going to stay with Michael. And Michael finds a card and hands it to Ivy, who looks at the thin card uncertainly and asks, "What is this?" Michael's short and sweet. "Payroll card, for your safekeeping. Not much money, as long as you don't buy luxuries, enough to get by." His profession, born into death, to protect the country, the treatment is good, but really cannot talk about what money, compared to the businessman David. "I do not know where to go." The Ivy didn't make nice with Michael and took it with a smile that she knew that with Michael's nature, since he had taken it out to her, he would never take it back. "I don't mind you. I don't have much money. If she goes to a company with this specialty and further her education for a few years, she will also have a very rich future." But she chose to follow in the footsteps of her grandmother and her mother by becoming a diplomat. It's a good paycheck, but it doesn't really go hand in hand with being rich. She, like him, had given up personal gain for the hot ground beneath her feet. He has left his mark on the desert frontiers of his country, while she has traveled on various diplomatic occasions, in the corners of the world. For the benefit of her country, Michael took Ivy into his arms. "Well, knowing you don't mind me." Ivy stretched out her index finger and poked him. "Michael, when are you going to put my name on the real estate license, too?" She was only joking. But Michael said solemnly, "Well, I'll go change my name sometime." Listening to his tone that didn't sound like he was joking, Ivy quickly waved her hand. No. Ivy doesn't want any of those things from Michael. She just wants him for who he is. Ivy was with Michael's people, not for his car and house. Fearing that he might misunderstand her, she hastened to explain, and Michael said no more. Michael still has Monday off because of the big drill coming up in a few days. Michael drove Ivy all the way to the door of her workplace. They went early. There weren't many people in the ministry yet. They just bumped into Xingyu when they got off the bus. Xingyu seemed to have seen the person in the driver's seat, and the disdain in her gaze at Ivy increased a few more points. Ivy ignored her and headed straight for her office. At the end of the shift, Michael came to pick up Ivy again. Ivy was still staying over at Michael's, and the next day Michael went back to his flat, and Ivy drove herself to work. As soon as she arrived at the unit, she was called to Director Lee's office. After Ivy returned from teaching in the Western Province, Director Lee became more and more optimistic about this little girl. At this point, he looked at Ivy with a smile on his face. "Ivy doesn't have a boyfriend, does she?" Rose had been making the case for Ivy the other day, and quite a few of the leaders in the Foreign Office knew about it, too. But I don't know how. But David and Ivy, the handsome couple, seemed to be quite compatible, and the cooperation at the conference was very successful. But it just didn't seem to work out. Ivy did not even have time to speak. Was Director Lee blocked back. "Tomorrow afternoon our ministry and the troops have a fellowship. You also go too. See, inside the boys are quite spirited." Ivy, just about to export the words, and then back to the stomach, said, "There is a boyfriend it." This immediately have to reach the ears of Rose, said, "There is no it, she does have," and Director Lee is so enthusiastic, she wants to not just go, and do not communicate with other people. Is that at night she and Michael were on video about her being caught by Director Lee at some sorority convention, and Michael immediately frowned. Fearing that Michael had spilled his jealousy again, Ivy hastened to assure him that she would not look at another man again. It took Michael a moment to calm down, and the two chatted for a while longer. Hanging up the phone, and Michael put down the phone and thought about it. No, he seemed to have heard Lucas mention a few days ago that their unit was going to hold a fellowship with some unit. The next afternoon, Ivy unit colleagues who are going to participate in the fellowship are very active, said to bring back a soldier brother or sister, the only Ivy, who froze until the last minute to get into the venue of the so-called matchmaking convention. She found a corner to sit in and hung her head down, trying to minimize her presence as much as possible, the while this was going on. Her cell phone vibrated a few times and Ivy pulls it out and it's a message from Michael, arriving at. The Ivy just assumed he was checking in, and rushed back with the word, Michael was sitting in the venue, his eyes were like mounted radar, scanning round and round the room without seeing Ivy. He'd obviously asked Lucas. It was their unit's association with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so how could it be without Ivy? He went to Lucas yesterday, and when he got the exact news, told Lucas he was going too, and shocked Lucas into a sweat, that he had to explain to Lucas that he was there to look for his daughter-in-law, who had been escorted to this dating convention by the leader there, and that Lucas had only half-heartedly allowed him to come to the but Michael's here and he can't find Ivy. Don't get me wrong, Michael looked around a few more times, thinking that if he was really in the wrong place, he'd just pull out and just withdrew to the door. He saw the innermost corner sitting a girl, others are dressed like a flower, only the girl long coat and long pants, dressed not the slightest but also lowered his head, afraid of others to see her like. The whole person is like a small ostrich. The girl is not a little ostrich. The girl is not a little ostrich, she is not a little ostrich, she is not a little ostrich, she is not a little ostrich, kinda keeping his end of the bargain with her. Michael couldn't help but smile and Michael tried to get to Ivy, but the crowd was getting too big for him to squeeze through. He just looked at her from a distance, grabbed his cell phone, messaged her, looked up, looked 15 degrees ahead of you. And what did Ivy know about 15 degrees ahead? She just looked up and scanned ahead, catching a glimpse of Michael in the crowd. The Michael wore his regular uniform today, no jacket, and a green short-sleeved military shirt with a 2-bar. 1-star insignia gleaming on the shoulders of the Ivy laughed at the fact that Michael had actually come along for the ride, but the two were separated by so many people that they couldn't have any other communication than eye to eye. It's the official start of the socialization. It's actually a blind date. This kind of bonding is a bit more relaxed. The hosts heckle a bunch of has-beens and then start playing games. The first game is dancing. The boys' side and the girls' side are given numbered cards, and the boys and girls with the same numbered cards dance a dance together, and the boys and girls with the same numbered cards dance a dance together. Ivy's got number 16. She's supposed to dance with the boy with number 16. Alas, there's no escaping it, and I wonder who number 16 will be, and how many tons of vinegar Michael's vinegar bowl will have to eat. Again, the girls hold up the number plates they're holding, and the boys come over and look for them, one by one. Ivy had it all figured out that if the boys were from their ministry, she'd just explain it to them during the dance. And I'm sure they'd be able to understand. If it's from Michael and his unit, that's fine. Just report Michael's big name. Sooner or later, it's going to be public. Anyway, Ivy hadn't dared to tell Director Lee, and only because of Rose. The people on Michael's side of the family didn't have to be so careful. In turn, the one who came to me was a young man from Michael's unit, who was quite handsome, and who had been trained in the army. Anyway, Ivy was just about to explain it to him when Michael squeezed in. Instantly to the side of both, Michael snatched the number plate marked 16 out of the lad's hand and slipped him his own. The young man was astonished. Chief of Staff, Michael waved his hand. Find another girl. I'll take this one. The lad had never seen Michael so rascally, and his eyes were wide open in unbelief that in this case, Ivy and Michael have a dance together. Dancing, for Ivy, is no mean feat. They engage in diplomacy, pay great attention to etiquette, sometimes to receive foreign guests will have a dinner party, waltz or something will be a little bit, although not standard, but also not to shame. As for Michael, he's been in the army for many years, he can handle a gun and throw a grenade, but he doesn't know how to dance. It doesn't matter. Just step on it. Everyone in the room was baffled when the music started. And the what about the dancing? Why is that music the accompaniment to the third set of elementary and secondary school students broadcasting gymnastic exercises? The crowd couldn't do anything but dance to the music for a while. Michael's face is not worried, pulling Ivy to go, but Ivy was hard to pull. Ivy laughed softly. It's quite interesting. Play a little while longer. The Michael had no choice but to stay with the girl when she got playful. After the primary and secondary school students broadcast gymnastics, the host spoke again, and the male and female partners who had just finished the dance and still wanted to proceed to the next program would be allowed to move on to the next program. Vain fact, the subtext of that is that if you're done dancing, and you're interested in each other, then you can go on and continue to be playful and reach out to each other. If not, it's time to get off the field. And those who get off the field can find someone who also looks good in the field to talk to. Ivy and Michael looked at each other with smiles in their eyes, and they were both certainly interested in each other, and mean a great deal. Ivy wanted to play, and Michael couldn't leave, so the two moved on to the next game without incident. In this game, one of the legs of the boys and girls are tied to a piece, and the boys dribble a basketball and reach a designated spot to shoot a basket. Such a maneuver should be completed 3 times back and forth, testing the tacit understanding between the two, and of course, the skill of the boys. The dribbling and shooting weren't difficult for Michael, he just really hadn't walked around with Ivy tied to him and didn't know if it would work or not. At the sound of the whistle, the game begins immediately. The two of them moved their legs, not at a neat pace, and did stumble a bit, but after walking for a while, the two of them matched their pace as if they were of the same mind. Ivy walked a little faster, with a larger step, and Michael adjusted his own step, trying to be as small as possible, and slowed down a little. And they weren't fast, but they were very smooth. Walking ahead instead of some of the teams where the boys were in a hurry to get ahead and the girls couldn't keep up, causing both of them to fall. In this round, the teams that have completed the task in the top 20 times and have the desire to move on to the next round of the game advance. If they are ranked in the top 20 but don't want to continue, they can also drop out, and the teams behind them will replace them in order. After such a round of games, just partner together, boys and girls. Some already look at each other, complaining about each other. Do not want to look at each other. Some are very interesting to each other, but unfortunately the technology is really not good. Did not advance, can only go to one side to chat. Once again, Ivy and Michael made it to the top. The game got a little bigger in the 3rd round, and I don't know who came up with the bad idea that this game involves girls passing candies on a table to boys with their mouths, and the boys receiving them with their mouths as well, and then placing them in a small bucket on another table, with a minimum of 20 candies to be passed in the allotted 1 minute. After announcing the rules of the game, the teams that were willing to move on to the next round of the game just now had backed out of the game. But at this point, it's already too late. The host said that military orders are like mountains, and since you've already chosen to enter, you can't go back on your words. So the girls only shyly and timidly on. Some embarrassed innocent big boys is a look as righteousness. Ivy and Michael were a different story. Mouth-to-mouth passing of things wasn't a breeze for them. It's just that there's so many people in this scene, and Ivy's still a little nervous about it. She bent over the table and picked up a candy, her teeth chattering a little, and watched the one candy fall to the floor. She turned right back around and picked up another candy. And this time Michael wouldn't give her a chance to drop it on the floor. He leaned right over and took the candy from her mouth fast, hard, and true, biting it securely, and sending it smoothly to the bucket. With the first candy delivered, there was a second, and by the second, Ivy had calmed down a lot. It was just a game. At this point the vast majority of the people were gathered around the edge, becoming a crowd of eaters, and from time to time hemmed and hawed. And right now, for example, there are people surrounding the two of them, either shouting cheers or saying, with a teasing tone, "How did you get so good, Chief of Staff?" Liam even ignored his own life's work and stood in front of the crowd and led them to call out directly to his sister-in-law. Thief no one else knows. Can Liam and a couple of Lucas still not know? That's a real sister-in-law. They're not fooling around. Soon, the two of them completed the task of teleporting 20 candies, not just in a minute. That speed was simply amazing. The results are in, and Ivy and Michael have come out on top. The host reads both of their names and asks them to come up to the stage to claim the ultimate prize for the first session of the day. Michael was quite unconcerned about that. He had been thinking of playing with Ivy. Ivy, think about it. Think the two of them in this situation to come to the sorority conference is also considered cheating, and do not want to go to receive the award. She hurriedly tugged Michael's military shirt, whispered, "Let's go." Michael looked at Ivy, and then around at the crowd that was gradually moving their eyes over to look at them. He nodded. Good. The two held hands, and without hesitation drew up their legs and ran away, leaving only a windy back to those present. The host shouted for half a day and saw no one, with question marks written all over his face. No one even wants to give out prizes these days. Chapter 9, I'll be with you. Ivy got a summons from Rose the next day. When she arrived at the flat, Rose gets right to the point. I heard from your coworkers that someone drove you to and from work the other day. And it was an officer. Ivy thought for a moment that Michael had been in civilian clothes the day he'd driven her to and from work, and it dawned on her who this coworker was, though without waiting for her to admit it or deny it, Rose added, that sorority yesterday, who were you doing games with, and I heard you won a prize. Ivy bit her lip. Why did her mother have to ask herself in such a questioning tone? Hadn't she made it all clear? The Rose was too angry, and her tone was a few degrees more harsh. Starting today, you're going to live at home, and your father's guards are going to drive you to and from work. Up and down the ministry looked the other way, and now that who didn't know that Ivy was her daughter, Rose didn't care so much about the for the first time in her life. Ivy contradicted Rose, and there was such hopelessness and despair in her eyes that although you are my mother, I am an adult and you cannot interfere with my choices in life. With a raised hand, Rose swept the quill off her desk. In the past her anger was always masked under a calm face. She was seldom this grumpy. What do you want me to say about you? I'm doing this for your own good. If it wasn't for the fact that nothing good ever happens to you two sisters when you have anything to do with Michael, I wouldn't be like this. Rose is also afraid, either of these two daughters, if any one of them has any shortcomings, she cannot afford. Me well. Say no more, you go out first. Rose did not listen to Ivy's parting words, and gave the order, peremptorily, that you should go back with me first, tonight. Out of the office, Ivy was so low, she didn't know what to say to Michael. Says her mom won't let them be together. Says she's going to be under house arrest. I don't think it's a good idea. I think I'll have to keep it that way for now. She messaged Olivia to spit it out, and specifically instructed Olivia not to tell Michael that. Olivia replied back, your diplomat Rose is a little too authoritarian and dictatorial for her own good, but it is authoritarian and dictatorial. Even her father, like the iron-blooded soldiers in front of her mother, also cannot get good, or John is too much. Love Rose. So always let her. So also created Rose now say no character. The after work, Ivy was forced back into the compound by Rose, and as soon as she got home, she was sent back to her bedroom, with a babysitter watching, as if she were a fugitive from justice. She could almost imagine that there was a long period of time in the future when life should be like this. The Ivy was so anxious that she scratched her ears, but there was also Amelia, who obviously didn't even know what was going on, and was having a good time watching the fun. Ivy wondered, with some mischievousness, if Amelia would still be able to laugh so much if she told her mother that the reason she was locked up by her mother was because she and Michael were together again. After dinner, Rose even took away Ivy's cell phone, and Ivy completely lost contact with the outside world. But this time she wouldn't take it lightly, and she was convinced that Michael was the same way. That Ivy stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in her bedroom, staring out of it, and the streetlights in the compound were dim, and even the shadows of the trees were blurred. But she just wanted to see that it was as if she had seen, through the dim light, the scenes of them as children playing together in the compound, of their bright future. The beam of headlights illuminated the front door of Ivy's house. The car, she'd seen it somewhere, she remembered. It was the car Michael was driving that day when she'd gone home with him. He'd borrowed it from a co-worker. As luck would have it, she saw Michael open the door, get out of the car, ring the doorbell, and subsequently enter her home. The Ivy lifted her feet and was about to run downstairs, opening the door. She saw the nanny, who had lifted a bench and sat in the doorway. Ivy braked her feet and she walked back unhappily, leaned back against the window again, still looking out, and time is ticking away. Ivy began to think, did Michael get the news? Did Olivia tell him? Did he come to her? Or a few minutes later, she saw Michael walk out, and too far apart and dimly lit by the streetlights, she couldn't read Michael's expression. He didn't go upstairs during those few minutes. He went to look for Rose. Ivy's heart steeped. Rose was in a rage. What could Michael say, and would Rose listen to it? Like the thick ink of the night, Ivy saw the headlights come on again, and then slowly move away. Over the next few days, John's security officer, Chen, began to transport Ivy to and from work. Rose had re-given her a cell phone that had nothing in it, and whose function was limited to receiving messages from the unit. Ivy's almost equivalent to losing contact with the outside world. When she returned to the compound in the afternoon, Ivy was surprised to see Andrew, and she immediately asked Chen to stop the car. Chen was a bit puzzled. fearing that one did not look closely what went wrong. Ivy is simply helpless, she is now being guarded like a prisoner, no freedom at all, always treating people gently, her tone of voice are stained with a few points of anger. I just go to talk to him a few words. Can still fly not, I'm not sure if I'm a good person, I'm not a good person. Xiaochen thought that Ivy didn't have this ability, so he parked the car on the side of the road and let Ivy out of the car. Ivy opened the car door almost at the speed of light and went after Andrew. Andrew, Ivy shouted loudly from behind Andrew. The Andrew stopped dead in his tracks when he heard the voice of Ivy hurriedly chased after him, and only when she had closed the distance with Andrew did she speak in a small voice. Andrew, can you get in touch with Xiaoshuan's brother, the she doesn't dare to make too much noise. Xiaochen is still watching behind her. Andrew looked at the cars and people behind Ivy and probably understood what the situation was, and also lowered his voice and said to Ivy, Michael's been away on maneuvers for the last few days, and didn't he go to your house the other day? And he and Michael were both in a meeting that day, and Michael, I don't know what came over him, suddenly stormed out of the conference room and took off in his car. Then Michael came back, and he got the general idea of what was going on. Andrew had grown up with them in the compound and knew that Ivy's mother, Rose, was strong, but he had never expected Rose to be so paranoid again. He looked at Ivy, thinking that a girl like Ivy certainly couldn't argue with a strong woman like Rose, and it was good to know that Michael wasn't one to give up lightly. Were his brother Xiaoshuan maneuvering, Ivy single-handedly north of Sunnyside, G-Borough, he merely reported a place to her, which wasn't exactly a leak. The Washington isn't that far to Sunnyside, but that what's-his-name county, it's hard to get to. The back in the car, Ivy's mood dropped a few more notches when Xiaochen saw her like this. He couldn't help but feel a little puzzled in his heart, and put a wind in Ivy's sails the wrong way, and she chatted with Andrew for a few moments, and wilted. Xiaochen felt that how he did it was wrong. Next time it is better not to let her go to chat with random people, lest Rose turn back to nag him in front of the head of the less. Ivy lay in bed all night tossing and turning, just unable to sleep. As soon as she arrived at the ministry the next day, she immediately went to Director Lee and asked him to grant her leave of absence. Ivy's sabbatical leave have not yet taken it. Saved a lot, and now on fiery looking for Director Lee to approve the leave. Director Lee thought she had some kind of emergency at home. It just so happens that Rose these days, to go abroad on business. Ivy and Director Lee this good reputation, professional quality, and willing to suffer, or Rose's daughter. Director Lee had no doubt, and immediately granted half a month's vacation. Ivy couldn't wait for the end of her shift with her vacation slip in hand and a heart that wanted to go to Michael's. She was really afraid in her heart that if she didn't leave at this time, with Rose's tactics, would she be made to never see Michael again, for the rest of her life. Ivy called Chen to come pick her up.